Hi everyone, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us for our third panel series on Newtown Creek. My name is Acacia Thompson. I'm the Environmental Justice Coordinator and a librarian here at the Greenpoint Environmental Education Center. Welcome to all of you and those welcome who haven't visited us before. We're very excited to have Carter here tonight to talk about what's happening on our waterways. Just a few things. Bathrooms are down the hallway, as is the water filling station. And then I just wanted to plug a couple events that are coming up here at the library. We do have, as you can see, we're starting to amass lots of books for a robust book sale in next week, Saturday the 19th. That's a really great event. Our City of Forest Day, we're going to be representing for the Forest Coalition. It talks about they are working towards promoting the health of our urban canopy, and we're going to be doing a citizen pruner outing and then also having a little bit of tabling here on different things, ways you can engage in helping the trees in our community. And if you're a Greenpointer, you might know about some of the ginormous towers on our waterfront. And some people from Lend-Lease who are part of that infrastructure are going to be doing a community event to let people know about the different geothermal infrastructure that's happening at that building, which some people might be very interested in learning about. And then at this exact moment, we have our young adults in the teen zone working on a workshop on bioplastics. So if you have any young people, teenagers, young adults in your life that would like to learn how to use natural materials to make plastic-like items that will biodegrade very easily, we've got that happening as well. So enough about that and BPL. I will now introduce Willis Alkins, the Executive Director of Newtown Creek Alliance.
So thanks, Acacia. Sorry, I'm just adjust this a little bit. Thanks, Acacia and the library for having us. This is our third and final event in the series, so it's been really great. Before we get started, I'm going to do a little intro about just a little bit about Newtown Creek and a little bit about our organization. Also want to give a shout out to some of the other NCA staff that are here. Brenda, who's our horticulturist, oversees all of our plant-based activities and volunteer events. And then we have Gus, who's our green space steward, who works closely with Brenda on a lot of the restoration work. And then Hart, who's our environmental educator. So come talk to any of them after the event if you have questions. And shout out to Peter, because I think you're maybe the only one here who did the trifecta of all three lectures.
Free coffee.
Free coffee, yeah, a regular volunteer with NCA. So, going sort of back and forth. Okay, so we're, is this? Oh, all right, sweet. We're a community-based organization founded in 2002, dedicated to restoring, revealing, revitalizing Newtown Creek, the entire length of the waterway, which is about 4 miles, and both sides, Brooklyn and Queens, of Newtown Creek. Real quick, Newtown Creek has a lot of issues. A lot of those were documented in the last lecture about a lot of the industrial history. And so, first and foremost, Newtown Creek, the entire site is a federal Superfund overseen by the EPA, and that's because of the industrial activity that's here beginning back in the mid-1800s. And so the contamination is severe at the bottom of the creek. We have what's known as black mayonnaise, which is essentially 10 to 15 feet. Think about that. Like this room is probably 15 feet high. 10 to 15 feet of this sludge material that's accumulated all these toxins that have been dumped there since, again, like the 1850s. And so the federal government is here to figure out how to deal with all that nasty contamination that poses a health risk to us. If you were to go walk around there, if you were to eat crab or fish from the creek, you'd be exposed to it. And then obviously the wildlife as well. Very big issue. Another issue is combined sewage. Combined sewer overflow is an issue around all of New York Harbor. We might talk a little bit about that tonight. And on the Newtown Creek, it's really severe. We have over 1 billion gallons of untreated sewage being discharged to the waterway every year. And it's more severe here because the waterway is both very narrow compared to places like the East River, the Hudson, and the volumes are so significant, but also that the water body is very, very stagnant. We don't have a lot of strong currents, so anything that's been dumped there, like petroleum products in the past, etc., tends to stay there. So water quality is a major issue that we need to figure out. Another thing is lack of access, right? Newtown Creek has very few places where you can easily even see the waterway. About 11 miles of shoreline, but there's really only like 2 or 3 official access points that have been created. So that's something that we really are working to reverse, because we feel like this lack of access has helped perpetuate a state of neglect, abuse, disinvestment in the waterway, because people don't see it, they don't know about it, they don't care about it, they don't fight for it. So we're really trying to change that. And then lastly is obviously all the ecological harm that has taken place. The Newtown Creek, we'll talk a lot about this tonight too, right? A lot of the natural habitat that was there was completely lost. And so all this wildlife that's coming back doesn't have the home that it had for thousands of years. So opportunities. This is the Newtown Creek Nature Walk. For those who haven't been, definitely recommend going to check it out. It's one of the few access points to the creek. Really incredible space. And it also sort of speaks on some of these opportunities that we're working on. So one, education. We do a lot of programming as an organization to bring people to the waterway, to learn about it, whether that's events like this that are education for a broad audience, or working specifically with the schools. And also want to give a shout out to the Brooklyn Public Library, because we're doing a project with them now to do a lot of intensive education with the Greenpoint public schools. So we're going out, visiting them, giving information, bringing them to the creek, doing all sorts of cool field work. So education is a really great opportunity on the waterway. When you're learning about natural sciences, you don't have to think of it as an abstract concept. It's actually right in our backyard. Recreation, the waterways, as we'll talk about tonight again, can be a place of enjoyment, open space, etc. So again, that's the importance of having access, like this beautiful area where you can walk down and observe the wildlife at low tide. And then ecology, right? There's a lot of opportunity to do restoration on the shorelines, upland areas, salt marshes, etc. And then lastly, I'll mention the jobs part, because although we're so focused on the environmental conditions of Newtown Creek, our organization was also founded to preserve the industrial manufacturing uses that surround almost the entire creek. And so these are a lot of essential services, blue-collar jobs that are very accessible, and the city's also lost a lot of this industrial zoning in the past 20, 30 years. So for us, it's about finding ways to utilize the water for transportation of goods, which we'll also probably talk about tonight, and then thinking about ways to transition from things like fossil fuel storage, waste handling, things like that have had more harmful impacts on the community to something that's better environmentally. So real quick, I mentioned the EPA Superfund process that's been going on since 2012. And no, 2010, sorry. And so right now is a really interesting time, because the EPA has put forward what's called an early action plan. So it's a cleanup of a small parcel of the creek, which is back near the Grand Street Bridge, a tributary called East Branch. And so we're very, eager for this to happen to help advance the full cleanup of the creek. This was a meeting they had last month. It was the only EPA hearing on this, but there's a lot of information. I think if you scan this QR code, it goes to our website that has all the info about the cleanup plan. And essentially we have, I think this next slide shows it. This is like a schematic from their plan about what they're proposing. And so, again, orientation. This is Grand Street in the middle, for anyone who knows the very old, small green bridge that's back there. And they're proposing to basically do dredging across this entire area. So removing approximately 3 feet of the top sediment, which might sound like a lot, but then remember I said it's 10 to 15 feet thick of toxins. So we're really concerned about what's going to happen to the rest of that toxic sediment at the bottom. And then they would be placing a cap of sand and stone on top of it with the idea that it would prevent the movement of any contaminants that are left in the bottom. So it gets very technical, all this stuff, right? You have to like understand what, I don't know, in situ stabilization techniques are, and amended caps, and all these other cleanup terminology, and or what NAPL is, or there's 10,000 acronyms. So we've been really trying to break this down and understand what they're proposing and voice our concerns about it. And we have a lot of those right now. And so what we're working to do through Newtown Creek Alliance, as well as there's a community advisory group, is formalize those comments and get a lot of people to echo them. So let's see. So for one, we're also trying to have a fun event to get more people engaged with this, so that you don't have to just look at graphs and talk about NAPL and in situ stabilization and all this other stuff. So we're going to have an event on October 26th that's going to be back near the East Branch section. It's one of the few places, Plank Road, where you can access the waterway from public land. We're going to have canoeing with the North Hoboken Community Boathouse. We're going to have planting that Brenda and Gus are going to oversee. We're even going to have some live music, and we're going to help educate people more about the details of this plan so they can submit comments to the EPA. Because if we don't, just to go back real quick, if this plan is not really protective of human and ecological health, which is our concern, that it's sort of a light scraping of the top and not really addressing how this is going to impact us, then we might get this for the entire creek. And so it means that we need to make sure this is done really, really well. And the comment period is our opportunity to do that. So there's some folks here, like Professor Sarah Durand, who's been very involved in this, and we work very closely with our elected officials, a lot of community stakeholders, to hold EPA accountable, but it takes a lot. So really encourage all of you all to learn about this plan and to come to this event. The QR code goes to the website for it, and if you can't make it, that's fine, but think about submitting comments. There's also Riverkeeper put out an easy comment letter form, and so that's a good way too if you're want to support it but don't have all the time to write your own comments. Real quick, we have some other events coming up. This already happened, but we have on Sunday another bike tour that we're doing that's focused on last mile distribution facilities. And so these are like giant FedEx and Amazon warehouses that are kind of taking over a lot of the manufacturing spaces in the city, which is a big concern for us. And so we've been working with a lot of groups around the city to implement change on that. So if you want to bike around some of the industrial areas of the creek, really cool opportunity, check that out. And then we also have a few more autumn evenings at the Green Roof that we manage, Kingsland Wildflowers. If anyone hasn't been there, it's a really amazing green roof and industrial Greenpoint behind the wastewater treatment plant. And you can come hang out with the plants. You can look at our native nursery, buy a plant if you like, and just hang out. That's about it. So this is our website, or no, where does this QR code go? I think this goes to our link tree, so it has all the links to everything that we've mentioned, and follow us on social media. This is Plank Road, where the big event's going to be on the 26th, so it's a very nice place. So that's about it on NCA stuff. Any quick questions about clarification? Okay, cool. Then we're going to get to the main presentation, which is Cartercraft. And very excited to have Carter here. I met Carter a long time ago, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. And Carter has a long history of working in so many of these different realms that we talked about, right? Trying to reclaim access and use to the harbor, trying to create opportunities for restoration, the ecology, ways to improve even operations, businesses, things like that. And so it's been a real joy to work with Carter on Newtown Creek projects that we'll hear a little bit about, but also to learn from him about how all these things are happening in these waterways that surround us, and so many opportunities for us to better engage with those. So I'll pass it to you, Carter, for the main event.
We are the main event. But thank you, Willis. Now that I've had this fine roast from Manhattan Avenue that was brewed 12 hours ago, I think I'm going to stand instead of sit. But events like this and organizations like Newtown Creek Alliance, it's all about building and expanding the sense of community, you know, sort of the joint problem solving that we're all trying to do. So small steps towards that direction. I think it'd be great to go around the room and for everybody to say their name and maybe one topic they're interested in learning about or talking about with tonight's program. And since you're in the front row and you're right there, I'm going to start with you. And we can just pass the mic that way.
Okay, my name is Christina. Greenpoint is very dear to me since I'm of Polish heritage. And I've learned very recently about the different activities and organizational efforts to improve the ecology of Newtown Creek by volunteering with the kayaking group in the boathouse. So I'm very, very interested in the access, healthy access, and maintaining the health of the waterways here.
Thank you. Keep going.
My name's Bob. We moved here about 3 years ago and just learn a little more about the area.
I'm with Bob. My name's Carol. Don't say it. Bob Carroll, Ted and Al, it's okay. And yeah, we moved here and just kind of exploring the area.
My name is Willa. I live in Crown Heights and I grew up in Park Slope, and so I've always been interested in the Gowanus Canal and kind of the new development going on there, and sort of am curious about Newtown Creek as a sister canal.
My name is Lucas. I'm super interested in how we got here with all the black mayo and how it accrued.
My name's Meryl. I was just interested in learning about the history of how we ended up at the creek.
Hi, I'm Julia. I always love to know what people's questions and thoughts are about the creek, so I'm excited to hear more. But
Hi, I'm Brenda, and I'm just excited to learn more about the waterway I love.
Hello, my name is Rosalie. My background's in civil engineering, so I'm just interested in learning more about things that are happening locally to try and see how I can use that in the sustainability sector.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm married to Carter, and I remember him working on the Newtown Creek hiking project years ago, so I've seen it from the water, but I haven't seen slides from other point of view, so I think it'll be interesting to hear more about the, how many miles is Newtown Creek, 6 miles?
Yeah, 11 miles.
11 miles, okay, so there's a lot more territory I have uncharted.
I'm Bill. I'm interested in the restoration and how long it would take.
Wow.
My name is Raymond. I'm 5th generation Brooklyn, and I'm interested in seeing how the creek is going to be ecologically revitalized, as it really should be.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm an architect, also working in the urban ecologies, restoration, and expanded understanding of the city beyond. It's like built environment, So how I want to learn more about what has been done already in terms of the recovery and the resurgence of the ecology at the creek, and then what are the challenges that are preventing it to it's fully come back.
Hi, I'm Corinne. I am a member of the Gowanus Dredgers, which is this sort of sister Superfund site, and things are a little further along in the process there, and there are some things that are not going great from our perspective, so I'm also interested in what's going on in Newtown Creek and staying up to date on those issues.
Hey, my name's Art. I work for Newtown Creek Alliance, and so I'm talking to kids and people every day about the creek, and I'm just always trying to learn more and how to tell that story even better.
My name is Nick. I'm mostly interested in learning about the history of the creek. We went to the talk 2 weeks ago, which was just a lot of the history of industrial chemical processes, which was also interesting. So it came to
I'm Isabel, I'm a native New Yorker, generally interested in urban hydrology and ecology. And I'd love to see how New Yorkers solve a community problem and build a new project. So excited to be here.
And I'm Francis. I live in central Brooklyn, so pretty much a blank slate with anything that has to do with Newtown Creek. I've lived in New York for 12 years, and I'm always interested in building roots by supporting community causes, and excited to learn how I can maybe support here.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm with the nonprofit No One's Arcs that brings exposure, advocacy, activism to polluted waterways. So always excited to see how we can envision Newtown Creek.
Hello, I'm Joe. I'm also with No One's Arcs, and I'm just very interested in hearing people's dreams and crazy visions of what we could do with this beautiful potential of Newtown Creek.
Hi, I'm Lisa, and the first time I heard about the creek was when I was in high school in Long Island City, and a science teacher took us down to the creek and told us how polluted it was. So I'm just really interested to find out what has changed since then, and what more changes are coming to kind of revitalize it and make it better for everyone.
I'm Ted Gruber. I'm a lifelong resident of Maspeth. I worked for decades on Provost Street, across the street from the wastewater plant. I paddle the creek and the East River with the Long Island City Community Boathouse. My interests are cleaner water and environment, more access to it, and better access to it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is LaShawn, and I am a representative for Phelps Dodge, and I am interested in cleanup and having a healthier creek afterwards.
Hello, I'm Peter. I have been studying, I study chemistry, and I've been studying the history, the industrial history of Newtown Creek, and I advocate for its remediation and access to the waterfronts, all the waterfronts in New York.
Peter, you also are our last speaker for this series.
And I'm Sarah. I'm a biologist and City University colleague of Peter's, and have worked with colleagues Carter Craft and Willis for about 15 years towards a vision we all share.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Cooper. I am a longtime boat person and neighbor of Newtown Creek, and I am very interested and engaged in what the future holds for a cleaner, accessible waterfront for us.
Hi, I'm Moni, and I'm here for funsies. So, yeah.
Hey, I'm Heather. I guess I'm interested in the water birds of Newtown Creek.
Hello, I'm Peter. I'm a high school teacher, and I guess my interest is has always been just learning more so that I can help my students get interested in nature and ecology in the city.
Hello, I'm Gus. I love maps, and I would like to learn more about the shape of Newtown Creek.
Hi, I'm Liz. I just want to know more about the creek.
Hello, my name is Anna, and I just think this project is long overdue. It's been an eyesore for the longest, so I'm happy to see that something is being done. That's all I got to say.
Hi, my name is Mark, and I'm an urban planner. I don't want to work in the city, but I do really enjoy learning about New York City's waterways and all the complexities. I think themes of ecology and also just even industrial preservation. So I'm excited to learn more tonight.
Hi,
Hi, I'm Diana. I live in Greenpoint, and I'm interested in learning about the cleanup efforts and generally how it can be conducted safely. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm the environmental community organizer here at the library, working on environmental issues in the area, and I'm also a lifelong MASPA president. So I'm interested just generally in waterfront development and access and the ways that communities interact with Newtown Creek.
Hey, thanks everybody. Quite a range of expertise in the room. And there's no way I'll be able to answer every question, but I'm so grateful to have Professor Sarah Durand here and Wills too, who will join for the Q&A at the end. So for all those topics related to how long will restoration take, how do communities solve problems, what kind of dreams and crazy visions do other people share, what's involved in the cleanup, how can we get more boating, what about, what are the prospects for nature and ecology. I'll do my best to cover as many of those as possible, but there's a lot of other expertise that we can sort of share at the end of the Q&A. For those to whom I don't cover enough, well, we got some free stuff. So over here on the side table, or on the counter here, are a whole collection of books which we've actually been cleaning out in our office, a bunch of duplicates. You know, here's something on building with nature. Here's a book on Rebuild by Design, which was the big New York City initiative to help pilot some new large-scale flood defense infrastructure. And for those in education, I've got crab claws, we've got honeycombs, and we've got what I think is really the best metaphor for this whole gathering, which is a wonderful cluster of oyster shell and a little miniature oyster colony. So I'm hoping one of you educators will take it home. I'm gonna hand it to Willis to pass around. But I really, I keep these things on my desk at work. Oh, I forgot. If anybody has an old diesel engine, and you need a new impeller, well, this is good for like 671s and Volvos and maybe for some GMs, depending on the diesel engine crowd. During COVID, we repowered our small boat and went from diesel to a 4-stroke gas. So now I've got an impeller I don't need. Anyway, also up here are some teeny tiny, they're a little delicate to pass around, but you can, well, you look like trustworthy people. Some teeny tiny horseshoe crab shells that I picked up on an outing with my daughter this summer to Sandy Hook. So in jumping in, let's see, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of just a short overview, a little bit of the present situation, related to the creek. Is this a touchscreen or?
No.
You think? A little bit of the present situation, not just of the creek, but like humanity. I'm going to talk a little bit about values, social values that we all have as individuals, values that we try to propagate and share through our work. I'll talk a little bit about like how we build things as society and how we decide and where and why and how to build certain things. I'll touch on some projects on Newtown Creek, on the Harlem River, Randall's Island, Governor's Island. That's kind of the first half. And then the second half is really like, I hate to say it, like 15 to 20 lessons learned. This was, in preparation for this, it was a great opportunity to kind of reflect on some of my own work, on the creek and elsewhere. I think the first time I went in the creek was with a carpenter named Tom Molnar, probably about the year 2000, and we launched at the end of Manhattan Avenue before there was a Manhattan Avenue street at Park. It was a difficult place to learn how to set up a folding kayak. And it was a really not great body of water to then understand, like, well, if you don't seal those seams really carefully on your folding kayak, well, I'll stop there. And then the last part is sort of, the last few slides are sort of like, sort of where we go as society, where we go as city dwellers. And it's a really crazy time to be talking about this in advance of a national election, and next year a municipal election, when it seems like a lot of our, I won't say anything else about our political leaders, but hey, there's vacancy. You'll see the postings, you'll see if we can zoom forward. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm like frustrated, but also kind of encouraged that we're finally coming to terms with like all the stuff that we don't know. And there's so much that we don't know. And for anybody, we'll make the slides available via the website or via NCA. I do need to take one more last look. Most of the photos are mine. I've credited 2 other photos, but I do just want to make sure I'm respectful of the image creators, if there are any more, before we make it public. But you know, just that little quote about USGS, which collects a lot of soil and weather data, the Weather Service is part of it, you know, it hasn't been that long since they started collecting data on these sort of large storms. And even when you look at weather data within the region, National Weather Service, you know, up until about the 70s, there were only 2 places in the New York metropolitan area where annual rainfall data was being collected. You know, Central Park, and now finally we have like Central Park, JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. But as we all know, in the crowdsourcing world that we're in, and the extreme storms that we're facing, like there's so much more granular stuff that's happening on a neighborhood level, on a block level, on a sewer shed level, on a CSO shed level. And if you're really only collecting weather data at 4 major points in a metropolitan region, you're missing a lot. You know, tell that to my family's friends and neighbors in western North Carolina who never imagined they would be getting so much rain. Tell that to the people in Houston, Hurricane Harvey. The map on the bottom right shows what the water was doing at 9 o'clock on October 29th, 2012. And it's sort of, it reminds us that this sort of dynamic system that we're in, you know, well, where it's narrowest, you'll see the water moving the most quickly. So this is sort of a velocity map. You can see the surface currents. This was sort of looking at the whole metropolitan area, and at high tide, what was projected high tide, even the water is still kind of racing in. As the tide comes into Gravesend Bay, it starts to bunch up a little bit because, you know, there's this huge drain of the Verrazano Narrows, and as you go up the Hudson River, you know, there's this whole gigantic floodplain all the way up the Hudson River. And I say floodplain because even on a daily basis, you know, the salt water from the ocean goes 60 miles north all the way to Poughkeepsie every single day, twice. So when you look at super regional problems, you know, there's discussion now for desalination plants farther up the Hudson River because Poughkeepsie gets all their drinking water from the Hudson. New York City DEP Commissioner Rit Agarwal even mentioned a year ago that the city of New York and the city of Philadelphia may actually have to invest in a desalination plant for the Delaware River because New York City's Delaware watershed system kind of in a way deprives Philadelphia of more drinking water because we're drinking water here that actually comes out of Philadelphia's upland watershed, but we bought those rights a long time ago. But it might be kind of a super regional kind of border water problem that we all have to kind of solve in our lifetime. I'd like to throw the quotes up here. This is for a class I was doing at Pratt, Waterfront and Wetlands Planning. And as you scroll through, one of them came from a science textbook from 1922. I got this great like Smithsonian Science Library that I found on the street. So cheers to you pickers. But you can see, you know, one of the reports, you know, they were even talking about climate change in the 1770s. So what we think of, quote unquote, ourselves as sort of new topics, it's really not a new topic, you know. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation didn't come about as a result of the Clean Water Act. It was created in the 1880s as a push to stop the deforestation of New York State. You know, the sort of the agrarian interests that were destroying every forest and clouding the streams. But this last one at the bottom, you know, the official librarian at the Weather Bureau, this is a little bit of a confusing quote to me. So, friendly homework assignment, if anybody can help me get to the bottom of this quote, is he agreeing, disagreeing, or just pointing out that there's inconsistency in the way that we are finding and presenting data? If we can find that quote again, I'll buy a cup of coffee on Manhattan Avenue sometime. So I do want to get to the bottom of that. If you have to, it'll come back. We'll make it available. Charles Fitzhugh-Town, librarian at the U.S. Weather Bureau. But it all comes down to this, and I say this as an advocate. I say this to remind myself. in all these things, whether it's super fun cleanup site, whether it's how we design a new street and park, whether it's, what's the new library gonna look like? It's really it's a set of simple, connected questions, but it's kind of simple. Who decides? And what do they decide, and when they decide? In my early years of working at the Waterfront Alliance a long time ago, I got to see sort of the powers that be at the City Planning Commission and the New York City Council, and you could see the people in the back of the room writing stuff down on a little piece of paper, and then they would walk up to the front of the room, and they would put it in the hand of the chair of the Planning Commission. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, that's not her chief of staff. Like, that's not even a department employee. That was just somebody in the back who knew him, knew her, and could put it in their hands. And that made me a huge cynic of the public process, because I started to see that, the decision has been made before the public hearing has even taken place. I'll pause there. And to bring it to the creek, this was a great quote, and a great effort, and I want Sarah to wave her hand one more time. Sarah, wave. When about 10 years ago, with some City Parks Foundation funding to create sort of some pilot wetland basins on these very sterile bulkheads, of which there are probably 250 miles of sterile bulkhead in New York City, if I had to hazard a guess. The attitude became, well, let's just do it. And then we'll go places where we think it'll work. We'll go to property owners that we think are friendly, or at least not hostile. But in the early days, we didn't look at DEC permits. We didn't ask for letters of agreement. We didn't ask for anyone to sign anything. We really just started to do it. And for the most part, it went really well. Now this sort of do-it model, let's be careful though, is expanding all over the place. So this is a little RETI Center nonprofit I'm on the board of down in Red Hook, and this is sort of their Blue City kind of pilot campus, where literally this is Plus Pool 1.0. This was the first kind of floating platform of the Plus Pool project, doing some data collection on the Hudson and the East River to understand wave heights, et cetera, and water quality. This was CanDoc, some of which came from Harbor School, and I forget where the rest of the stuff came from. Actually, somewhere in here, Ted, one of these is actually a plastic dock from the summer of 2000, one of which ended up in Annabelle Basin, one of which ended up at the Yonkers Canoe Club, and somehow that has made its way to Red Hook about 2 years ago. So, and then on the bottom right, this is a pet project of the RETI Center, sort of these floating kind of wetland gardens, but everybody's been doing those. You've seen them on the Gowanus Canal and elsewhere for 10, 15 years. I'm trying to remember the architect who did one on the Gowanus Canal about 15 years ago. It wasn't Judith Hines, but it's right in front of where the native plant sale happens now. Yeah. So there's plenty of ideas out there. Now we just need to kind of replicate it at scale. So here's a closer look at the wetland basins, which is still going on now at the USA Waste site. Is that what it's called, Sarah? Where you built Waste Management site on the creek. And if you come on one of Newtown Creek Alliance's tours, and the very simple idea was to create basically a window box, but do it in an industrial strength, so it can handle the wave energy. It can handle some inevitable boat collisions. I've had one boat sink on Newtown Creek a long time ago. That was a wooden boat, so now we do stuff in metal. And with some guidance from DEP, some very affordable supplies from New York City Parks Department's Native Plant Center on Staten Island. Each of those things ended up being $200-300, I guess, back then. And we went to Home Depot, or we went to Big Reuse for buckets. I mean, you can do a lot with just sort of off-the-shelf stuff. But to bring it back into the, kind of regional picture, imagine all this space in green, 300, 400, 500 years ago. There's still an amazing amount of green left, and I guess we should be proud of what we've been able to save. But what this map also reminds me is just the fact that, everywhere there's an edge in a water body, you kind of get this political edge or political boundary, between these places. So, the Hudson River off Manhattan has been able to be reclaimed for Hudson River Park, and way before that Riverside Park. It helps that there's a lot of money and a lot of taxpayers and a lot of commercial rent tax that's paid in Manhattan. But if you go to Upper Manhattan, just the other side, you know, what a shame, like the Harlem River has been getting kind of short shrift for a long time. It's really an inequitable situation that Hudson River Park, you know, we paved the way for Hudson River Park to be built because one of the first steps in making Hudson River Park was making an interim greenway that went the whole length of the park. So even when you had a tow pound at Pier 76, even when State DOT had a staging area at Pier 25, even when Pier 40 was under the administration of the Port Authority, even when sanitation was at the Gansevoort Peninsula, you know, the park agency then made this interim path. And that's why for all of you who are doing these interim activities or thinking about interim activities, you know, you're the ones really building the movement to fix all these inequities that exist everywhere. And along the Harlem River, you know, I spent years with Harlem Community Development Corporation and others sort of beating our head against the wall because City DOT was like, well, we need that part of the greenway for staging for this bridge rehab. And we need that part of the greenway for staging this other, you know, rehab. And now we need that part of the river greenway for this other rehab. And before you know it, well, 20 years have passed, and guess what happens every 20 years? They rehab another bridge. So that's been sort of a 25-year, I think, excuse by the city to just say, not yet, not yet, not yet. But clearly we should be more imaginative in how we do things. This is something I learned talking and working with Sarah on the creek is, you know, it's not just, yes, we have like super fun bills to pay, or we've got complicated and expensive, you know, dredging programs to pay for. But, you know, the reality is, until we figured out ways to like value what a healthy environment is, until we've actually started to put real and better numbers on quality of life, human health, what a compromised immune system means for people, what chronic asthma means to a family, what that means to the earning power of that family over time, you know, we still got a long way to go to sort of get the numbers right. There was a report put out by the Harbor Estuary Program during COVID, and they partnered with a group in Washington, D.C. called Resources for the Future, and the whole push was to try to get the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to not just say, hey, by putting in a giant barrier at the mouth of Newtown Creek or across the Verrazano Narrows, we're going to be saving this property or protecting this amount of real estate or these numbers of dwelling units. The whole Harbor Estuary Program's report by Resources for the Future was like, well, what are you doing to nature? And what are you doing to, you know, the viability and attractiveness of that community that maybe they don't want to live behind a wall? So I'm a firm believer that we need to change metrics. I had to throw a picture of Mitch Waxman in there because in my work with the Dutch Consulate, I got to visit Pittsburgh last year. And 25 years ago, you know, up until what, 5 years ago, Mitch was a great sort of drummer for the whole Newtown Creek movement. He documented a lot of the history of the creek and the present conditions of the creek. And along with Bernie Enty, who before there was digital photography and before everybody had internet, was the most generous photographer of anyone I knew, sharing his pictures, sharing his maps, giving you a ride, taking you somewhere. I just want to say thanks to Mitch, thanks to Bernie, and if anybody remembers Willie Studioso, Willie the Barber, friends of the India Street Pier, there were lots of great pioneers in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s who kind of paved the way for the Alliance and hopefully a lot of the movements that you all are picking up. So thanks to them. I've had a lot of great people to learn from. I think we need to avoid this kind of trap of competing visions. And all of you who do stuff on or in the water, you know, has anybody been hit or died on the creek yet? I don't want to jinx it. But it was 15 years ago when the Maritime Association of the Port of New York and New Jersey, the longest standing maritime association, was like, absolutely not, no recreational boating, somebody's going to get killed. Hasn't happened yet. You know, meanwhile, how many people have been run over by tractor trailers or garbage trucks going up or down Kent? So let's avoid the trap of competing visions. Want to just talk a little bit about sort of water chemistry, and I think it's something, you know, really shapes the habitat that we have. It really shapes the life and biota and the flora and fauna that live here. You know, we've got this tremendous freshwater system of the Hudson River and the Hudson River's watershed that just pours fresh water out the mouth of the Narrows every year. And then over here, this is a salinity map. So you can see like super saline is at the top and fresh is at the bottom. So 10 parts per million of saline, and that's probably 20 to 30. But when you look up the East River, you're really reminded like, wow, how salty the East River is. And then you get reminded like, it's really not a river, it's a tidal stream. And way back when, we used to just say the East River was part of Long Island Sound. And the old maps even showed Long Island Sound coming all the way down to Randall's Island. But now we think of it as a river. But that has a huge implication for the different types of fish and plants that will live in all these places, which are so important for us to understand sort of the ecology of where we live. So a little bit on values, because it all comes back to property value at the water's edge, or it certainly has for the past 30 or 40 years. Ever since New York State adopted a brownfields law during the Pataki administration that sort of set the cleanup standards and helped sort of chart the path of liability and cleanup responsibility of different companies through the Greenpoint Williamsburg. That kind of was the tipping point for the Greenpoint Williamsburg waterfront rezoning, because then you had state standards for how clean did the land have to be in order to go residential and commercial before it just kind of sat there fallow with everybody fearing the worst. But for me, these have become some of my driving values over the years. And biodiversity is, it's right up there. And when I think about programs and activities that can help sort of all of us build this audience, it's about the feelings. Like, how do people feel when they're in the water? Or on the water or at the water, sunset, sunrise, whatever. I think a lot about the space, because we really think for 30 years, we've really had this view of the water as like something pretty to look at, but I wouldn't want my kids getting in it. I mean, there's a lot of people out there say, my parents, my grandparents always said, you can go down to the water, but don't touch anything, don't go in there, if you fall in, you're dead. And those old kind of stereotypes take a long time to turn over. But then our jobs and our work kind of also define our values. So in my day job, I'm an economic policy officer at the Netherlands Consulate here in New York City, working on water and energy issues in the Northeast U.S., a lot of water tech, some flood defense, a lot of renewable energy, especially offshore wind. And in my work, a lot of it focuses on the built environment, like how is New York City building, Boston, Philadelphia. Our office kind of covers the Northeast U.S. But I also get to learn a lot about Dutch examples, including the City of Rotterdam Climate Initiative. Rotterdam's probably like the size of Brooklyn. It's a much bigger port. It's about the same number of people, about 2.5 million people. And Amsterdam had a rainproof program about 15 years ago. Did anybody do Rainproof NYC? Anybody go to any of those meetings? Rainproof NYC. I'll put that in the next one. Yeah, because I think it's still going. But that was a whole planning initiative organized by Rebuild by Design to help New York City, be prepared for the next Ida or the next big, massive deluge. So there were some workshops and there were some focus group areas. I think they're pivoting towards to continue the work in sort of the next stage. But for me professionally, it's really inspiring to see some of the cross-pollination that happens across borders. And how do the Dutch decide when it comes to some of these things? It's a little more, I personally think it's a little more of an egalitarian society. The country is technically a constitutional monarchy, so there's a parliament. The parliament, through all their parliamentary elections, organizing coalitions to pick a prime minister. There is like a king and royal family. They make an influential speech every year, kind of speaking to Parliament about what they think the priorities should be for the country. That speech was just made 3 weeks ago. But they also use a lot of data, and they share a lot of data. One of my favorite examples from the Netherlands is the water utility called WaterNet, and they collect water quality data, but they also are like the speed cop for the canal boats. So they've sort of turned into sort of a water traffic observation thing. integrating it and making it accessible in ways that it's a little more hard to see over here. When it comes to flood protection, you know, the whole country is 12 provinces, it's about 20 million people, but they really put a priority on like human safety. They focus their money on like where are people gonna drown or die, or where are people gonna be injured. And that's really kind of the driving issue with water management there. There's an economic argument always, but you know, the good thing they do at the bottom is on the innovation and integration side, they do a really good job at trying to solve more than one problem at the same time. And this is an example of that. This is a flooding area in Rotterdam between a school, a church, a municipal administration building, and a hotel. So in trying to solve the flooding problem, they put it all together, got all the stakeholders together, and made this sort of public space that now has a basketball court, you know, amphitheater seating, a skateboard park. And if you look at the graphic, you know, you'll see like it's all these, this is a section drawing, it's all these different chambers and pumps and overflows, and it's all designed to, you know, fill up with water when it rains. So this has helped inspire New York City and the Housing Authority and some other entities over here to do similar things with sort of the green schoolyards and the play schoolyards. But the sad reality is, you know, for the design team, one of the designers is an old friend, they had the money already, and it still took 11 meetings of getting all the relevant stakeholders around the table to like want to play along and be nice and like try to help solve problems. And to me, that's a statement on sort of modern society where we're also caught up in our own thing, or our own property, or our own, you know, risk management, or our own potential liability. You know, it takes us a long time to get over this, like, we're sharing in the problem, people, so people, we gotta solve this problem together. In the end, it took a lot more meetings than that. And for those of you who've been following, you know, Newtown Creek and the recovery process, you know, it's hundreds and it'll be thousands of meetings by the end of it. The Zoom meetings are the worst. But anyway, we have to, I think we as society have to be more patient. And I think we have to push city and public agencies to just take the long view more often and not just, you know, not always fall into the, well, we have to spend the money this year. We have to spend the money this year. So in preparation for tonight's program, I was also thinking about like, well, it's a place, but you know, you can't separate place from program. And there's half a dozen boathouses around New York City that were built for boats that will never row out of those boathouses. And Ted and others probably remember those. Hudson River Park spent millions of dollars on boathouses that were designed for rowing schools, like Columbia or NYU would move a rowing program there. But they never really thought about the fact that when you've got all this ferry traffic, you know, you've got 2 and 3 and 4 foot waves, and you're not going to have a competitive rowing program where people are trying to break through the waves. So we can't really separate place and program. Over the years, I've had a real privilege to do things on and in the water, and some really wonderful people. You know, we did a marine master plan when I was working for the Harbor School on Governor's Island with a bunch of visiting Dutch ships in 2009. One of my first projects was with David Sharps. He needed to repair his bulkhead on the Gowanus Canal in 2001 or 2002. And after we had a big fight with Gene Delascio at the Gowanus Canal Community Development Corporation about doing a boat launch at the time, we're like, let's just give the money to David and we'll just buy our canoes with some other money and we'll launch from somewhere else. So in that case, we kind of had to pivot. You know, up on the Harlem River, it's not a terrible story. We've got some piecemeal progress. This is an edge design that we did with New York City Parks Department in the Waterfront Alliance days. This was kind of sort of the early days of what became the Wedge Project or the Wedge Initiative, Wedge Certification. And then that led to another project, not just on the Harlem River, but also on Randall's Island, which is a wonderful confluence, you know, right at this sort of elbow in the East River. And working with, I should credit Marcia Johnson, landscape architect of the New York City Parks Department, who's done so much great edge work over the years. She was the one, she had to get extra money to do it, but she was the one who actually paid an archaeological company and survey company to look back at all the historic layers, like, what was Randall's Island, before it got turned into, sort of a waypoint for bridges and the Triborough Bridge. So you can see these small outcroppings here. You can see how Little Hellgate Inlet went all the way across from the Harlem River side over to the East River side. And this whole part, it's, playing fields and New York City Fire Department training facility, that was all marsh. And that helped give Marcia and the design team some ideas like, well, if there's probably groundwater moving through here anyway, or the water table is going to be closer to here because urban fill has lots of pores and the water is going to be closer to the surface, that helped kind of inform the design treatment. So I'm a big fan of looking back at historic maps and historic layers to understand what to do next. Governor's Island, another super interesting place. I was working for the New York Harbor School during Superstorm Sandy, kind of an infamous and terrible time for many of us. But now, it became kind of a pivotal moment for the island where they're now kind of embracing more climate adaptation, climate innovation. Anybody doing anything with climate projects on Governor's Island? There's a new New York Climate Exchange that Stony Brook is going to develop out there with a bunch of money. The Trust for Governor's Island is creating their own kind of living lab stuff happening. Actually, the RETI Center got a little installation right here. So definitely good things are happening. So, in our work with the Harbor School at the time, it was sort of, well, yeah, we need to make a long-term vision because we have to tell Mayor Bloomberg is on his way out. We have to show Mayor de Blasio, why he should go ahead with the money that Mayor Bloomberg set aside to expand the school. What's the long-term vision for out there? We have to sell it to our landlord, the Trust for Governor's Island. But we also knew at the same time, we can't wait. We gotta just start doing stuff. So this was an experiment we did at Harbor School and on Pier 101 to bring, sort of the early stages of the ecological concrete movement. Sort of, everybody knows that making concrete and cement is a super intensive, it's energy intensive, it's fossil fuel intensive, and by the time you put the stuff in the water, well, it kills habitat. Nature doesn't really want to colonize some Portland cement in the mixes because it's so acidic. But if you can tinker with the mix, you can actually attract different kinds of algae. So this is e-concrete or eco-concrete. Now in Brooklyn, now going into East River Park. It's also in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. It's also in Brooklyn Bridge Park. Now quite honestly, there's probably 15 or 20 different ecological concrete mixes happening all over the world. Some from the US, some from the UK, really in every country. So I think anyone who's going to be building stuff or repairing stuff, there's so many new materials to work with out there that didn't exist 10 years ago. This was when we were putting the tiles in for the ecological concrete. That's Mauricio Gonzalez, who's been the longtime marine biology research teacher there. And this so-called kind of living lab movement is really taken off. And the living lab movement is taking off on the creek, so I think we got to give a woohoo for the Newtown Creek Alliance between the living dock and all your other ecological work and Professor Duran's work with the wetland basins. There's so much that nobody would have imagined 20 years ago that you would have gotten so far so fast. I guess to put it in context though, the long-term control plan consent orders for combined sewer overflow, the Superfund process, it's necessary work, but it's so draining. It'll suck your soul out. So, you have to find some things and keep doing the fun things because, not everybody wants to stay home and go through 1,000-page EISs and write memos. So, cheers to those of you who write those memos and go through the environmental impact statements. It's absolutely necessary, but as we get into lessons learned, we gotta balance it out also with the fun stuff. I'm going to pause here just to see if anybody has questions before I go into the lessons learned stuff and then the Q&A. Questions, anybody? Well, the path is not always linear. And that used to frustrate me when I was a full-time advocate, and now I've just kind of accepted it. Maybe also becoming a parent has something to do with it too. This was probably one of those 10 or 15 years ago pictures, Willis. And something I came to appreciate is like people's time is valuable. So I want to say thank you all for coming. I want to say please give any support you can to the Newtown Creek community, to the Alliance and the different creative partners who are making cool stuff happen on Newtown Creek and the surrounding tributaries. You know, the whole great ecosystem of New York City, from the Waterfront Alliance with the grass tops. But my three favorite groups over time have been Kiwanis Dredgers, Newtown Creek Alliance, and Bronx River Alliance. And if you ended up moving anywhere else or staying here, if you understand the history of those three organizations over time, even a little bit, you'll see three wonderful examples of success stories on how to build a real community movement while keeping your soul intact. Okay, lessons learned. You know, use the tools that already exist. We started a tree guard program using recycled pallets, free. 12-year-olds can do it. We started making natural cleanser using fir and pine from stuff that was grown in the neighborhood. That, you know, we found it on Instagram, and it actually works really well. You ended up mixing it with white vinegar and a little bit of alcohol and a little bit of water. It's an amazing natural cleanser. You know, we started monitoring like the urban heat island. This is the Hunts Point Station in the Bronx. That's the Metro North Railroad station, which may or may not get funded by Governor Hochul with this Triborough X program. But you know, I bought that when I had the boat with the old diesel engines that constantly overheated. And I was trying to figure out, like, why is this engine overheating? I was like shooting the exhaust, I was shooting, you know, the different cylinders. But you know, then about 8 years ago, working really on the creek, I was like, man, this heat is just crazy. I was wondering, be like, why is that? You see the parents walking down the street holding the kid's hand, like, why is that kid beet red? Why is that kid like piping hot red? But then when you see, well, the kid's 2 feet off the ground, and right there at ground level, it's 109 degrees. I'm like, oh my God, that's why. So use the tools that exist. You know, there's bigger tools out there like the flood barriers. I had to throw something in from New Bedford, Massachusetts. And that's been a fascinating project, you know, over the years because they're really trying to protect the integrity of their fishing fleet. It's the largest fishing fleet on the east coast of the United States anywhere. And they had to put in a storm barrier system while also trying to sort of maintain the function of the harbor as a fishing hub. It's been pretty successful. Anybody been to New Bedford? Yeah, let's see. And there's lots of great data points out there, you know, created by the national government. So this is right outside the Boston Children's Museum, and every year Boston Harbor Now has a king tide photo competition at the end of October to go out at the king tide at the end of October for people to share their photographs on like, well, how high is the tide where you are? And that gets, every year it gets new people involved, it gets new people more aware, like OMG, because that's something, you know, it's a very basic physical problem that we have here on the East Coast is that most of our harbor cities are flat. So most people who live in East Coast harbor cities, if you're not near it or connected to it or working on it, you may never really even think about it. But you know, if you live out in San Francisco or Vancouver or Seattle or whatever, you know, you see the port, you see the harbor, you see the sound every day. So we kind of have a harder educational job over here because we've got to remind all these people, Willis alluded to it earlier, you know, that it's out there. But use the tide data that you can find and become a crowdsourced, you know, data supplier. Because just like rainfall data, you know, there's lots of hyper-local conditions with high tide and low tide that don't necessarily get captured in the government programs. Learn that aesthetics are really important. You know, I was on at Snug Harbor Cultural Center to help out the Figment NYC art show a couple summers ago. And you can forget for a few minutes how decrepit and awful some of the buildings are, what terrible disrepair some of them have fallen into. Because you get distracted for a few minutes by this beautiful iris, and these little fields of irises that are nestled amongst the collapsing buildings. But aesthetics are important. I'm a big fan of generating your own data. And these are some pictures I took this summer. Our office is near Grand Central. And all in the span, you know, this was a construction site right at Park Avenue and 41st Street, and the surface temperature is 108 degrees. You know, 10 feet away, the surface temperature of this planet is 12 degrees cooler. And across the street at 101 Park Avenue, you know, with that water feature, 83 degrees. It's 25 degrees cooler. So, you know, we've piped ourselves into this system where we think like, let's just get rid of the water, let's get it off the land, let's put it out of harm's way, let's keep the roads safe for traffic. But you know what? Water is a great thermal buffer, and if we could keep the water on the land, we could make cities a lot more habitable. Also by growing the cities. So important. Do as much as you can just based on goodwill. If you wait to get it in writing, you may never get it. I mean, how much time did we spend with the Metro North license agreement, you know, for the Wheelspur Yard? Painful. Did a lot more, got a lot more accomplished, learned a lot more just by starting and doing. If we'd asked DOT for permission to hang these on their dolphin clusters off the bridge, you know, we probably never would have gotten there. Small steps, organize, and you know, don't forget to communicate. Really learn that. It's not just the doing, but it's getting the word out. And I think with social media now, it's more important than ever. Just a few examples from the past little while. You know, Governor's Island was heavily hit with Superstorm Sandy, but this iconic trailer, a refrigerated container, floated over from Red Hook. You know, this is probably 12 feet off the ground, but somehow came nestled between this tree and the light pole and the fire hydrant, but miraculously did like not wipe it out. It was so crazy. This year, on the Hudson River in Hoboken, where we live, you know, what has been fought over with New York Waterway about a future ferry home port, well, while the fight was going on, a bunch of common terns decided to nest on one of the piers. So that is a protected species in New Jersey. So while the earthlings and the humans were fighting, nature was like, yeah, we got this. So now there's new habitat in our town. And this is a little rain garden project I worked on in our local church. And actually this was during Ida. And it just so happened we had a volunteer day the day before, and in the basement of this 165-year-old building, which had chronic flooding problems, you could see the water coming through the wall. And we had 2 volunteers show up the night before. They created this very simple kind of berm system along the wall and stopped the flooding problem. And none of us knew like how bad Ida was going to be, but important to celebrate the small stuff. There's a lot of technologies out there. Some are really old. I showed you this from the RETI Center, the Old Plus Pool, the floating garden. And all this stuff can have new lives. I appreciate everybody who does the recycling. One of my favorite Dutch examples was this blue light monitor where they were using thermal camera integrated with satellite information so they could predict where the algal blooms were going to pop up in the mirrors and sort of the swimming lakes that were popular for swimming. And this is all imaging technology that was off the shelf that was being used for something else. They didn't have to invent anything. All they had to do was get the 2 technologies to talk to each other. And then it became a tool used by the local government that regulates swimming and public health related to water quality to say, oh, tomorrow there's probably going to be an algal bloom, so you may not want to plan to go swimming. They use it in a predictive sense. And there's nothing better than experience, you know, whether it's the experience of a crisis in a flood situation, or the experience of working together, the experience of getting the students or others out of the water for the very first time. Creating those experiences are super expensive sometimes, can be logistically complicated. There can be waivers and paperwork and insurance people who are telling you not to do this stuff, but we still have to find ways to do it. I got to visit a friend's family in Ghana a couple years ago, and his granddaughter, they spend a lot of their time in the summer just indoors. It's so hot in the village where they live, they don't want to go outside. And some of the waterways, the waterway, is so polluted they certainly can't touch it. So, here in this city, in this region, in this whole country, not only are there waterways that are polluted, there's a lot of people, this is still blows my mind a little bit, there's a lot of people when it's too hot, they stay inside. But what the data shows is that when you're inside, it may actually be hotter inside than outside, depending on your building stock, depending on where you live. Another great experience I got to see in the Netherlands was the solar boat race. So every year, I think it's called, it used to be Danish Oil and Gas, now it's called Ørsted. They do the offshore wind stuff too. They sponsor a solar boat race where every university level students build a solar boat, design the whole propulsion system, they fabricate the boat, they figure out the batteries, they do the solar panels, and then they race it through the canals in the Netherlands. So I think it's every 2 years now. And there's the only group from the US comes from like Ohio State or something like that. Really interesting, but super eye-opening. Ooh, here's a couple. These are a couple of my favorite. Adopt a scientist. And I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, because you know what, we love scientists, we need scientists. Trouble is policymakers, takes a little while for them to become science literate, etc. I mean, when I was doing advocacy with Harbor School, there was one scientist in the city council. Of the 51-member city council, there was one scientist. When I was doing work in the state of Massachusetts, there was one architect in the whole Massachusetts legislature, sort of like one. So we are suffering a shortage of people who like know how to build things, or people who understand science, and these are the people making budgetary decisions and policy decisions. So I would say to all of you doing creative stuff out there, help the scientists get out there. This is a workshop we organized with the city of Boston, and we had University of Massachusetts Boston, we had Boston Harbor Now, we had East Boston Neighborhood Alliance, and we went to a town called Revere. So Revere, you know, it's kind of like Long Island City and Greenpoint. You know, we're standing in Boston right here. Here's Revere across the creek. And the site was picked by one of the University of Massachusetts professors. He's like, I've always wanted to see this place because, you know, you see where like Boston's not in the floodplain, but then you see this spot in Revere where like, you know, they're 6 feet deep, you know, in a 100-year flood storm. So we took the whole group behind this strip mall to see the place, and we're standing here on the edge of the creek. We're 6 feet up, and you know, not only are they 6 feet lower, but you can sort of look at the stock of cars and where people live and the grills that they're using to cook on, etc. You know, this is a super vulnerable community. If you look at the income, you know, the median income of Boston is probably, God, I'd say 100 to 120,000 per household. If you look at the income of Revere, it's probably 40% less than that. And this was the first time that people had gotten out there to actually see the human side of all these kind of flood zone maps that, you know, we see on the New York Times and elsewhere. So up here was a scientist from NYU Cusp, and that was a big expensive camera that can take images of carbon emissions. So they were shooting skyline photos of central business districts, downtown, midtown, and Brooklyn, to sort of see and measure via photography, like what are the carbon emissions of these business districts on super hot days. So, you know, in both of those cases, like just little me and our small team, like we helped them get the angle that they needed. It wasn't really in our work program, but we knew it was important. I mean, quite honestly, we also wanted to learn, because I'm not a scientist. So every chance I get to work with you, who's a scientist in the room? 1, 2, 3. Yay, scientists! You've been adopted. But no, seriously, it'd be fun to work with any of you. The cynical planner in me says there's so much science that goes on that, you know, maybe it ends up as a poster, maybe it ends up as a paper, but you know, how do we keep that sort of knowledge alive? And that's why I think, you know, every project, interdisciplinary and otherwise, like, we need a scientist. And I feel the same about artists. You know, it's been working for the last few years with a photographer called Akra Shep. He's doing a photo book on the other islands of New York City. So this is one of our kids. We took him out around City Island. So he's really trying to get the water perspective on all these little rock outcroppings to put into his photography. ACCRASHEPP. You can find him on Instagram, working on his book. And for me, that's been super fun, super enlightening. And quite honestly, for him as an artist, it's hard to get out there. He's not a boater. You know, when we went out there last fall, we just went out again actually this was this year. We went out there this summer. I was like, hey, Akra, good to see you again. Like, oh, by the way, when's the last time you were in a kayak? Because that's our family kayak. He's like, you know, I haven't been in a kayak since the last time I got in a kayak with you in 2014 on the Arthur Field. So he's a photographer, he's a teacher, you know, not really a boater. So let's support our artists because they're super valuable communicators. I do want to talk about this map on the top right. That was a study done by a landscape architect named Ninka Rikst, who works in Friesland in the north of the Netherlands. And her assignment was try to understand where recreational boats and shell fishing operations were like competing with each other. Because all the tour boats like to go through the nature areas, but all the tour boats going through the nature areas stir up sediment, which interferes and in some cases kind of suffocates the shellfish growth. So as a landscape architect, she got this kind of dream assignment to kind of come up with some ways to render these conflicts. So she created these sort of heat maps showing where the richest shellfish beds were, as well as in the smaller dots, purple and yellow, like what were the most popular kind of recreational tour boat operations.
Carter, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have about 12 more minutes left.
Got it. Okay, watching our language. So you'll see it in the text, but I think even post-COVID, we have to be more sensitive about sounding too discouraging, being too doomsaying, because we really have to get the next generation engaged in, you know, solving problems. One of the last ones I'll mention is making places, and this is where I think the work of the Alliance is so important. You know, this is a place, actually, it's a place for migrants in the south of Spain. We thought it would be a great beach to go visit. As we got closer, we're like, wow, I think they came from North Africa, and this is like the safe place that they came to, and it's off the edge, and it's away from the city, and it's their safe place during the day and during the night, and then it turns into a little bit of a beach town during the day with everyone else. Everybody needs a safe place. Another one of my favorite places from the Netherlands, this is their Maritime Museum, where you can bring your historic boat and dock it in this section of the port, but you have to provide open hours and open programming X number of hours per week as part of your exchange to be here. But it creates such a rich visual environment, and it's a fantastic bridge, and it's a great kind of place to be. It doesn't actually cost the municipality that much because the content, you know, the platform are the boats provided by individual people. Just a couple more on stewardship. Another great sort of hat tip to the Alliance. Getting our hands dirty and doing things. At the bottom is the New Amsterdam City Swim. There's a lot of great swimming happening in New York City these days. More should happen. You know, now we're kind of getting into the ideas, but the Percent for Art program has been a big success in New York City. But something that I think needs more attention is, you know, like a percent for education. What if we had a percent for education about infrastructure going along with this Gateway Tunnel construction project out in the middle of the Hudson River? What if we had a percent for education or percent for art with every dredging project? You know, I mean, look at the percent for art project along the Nature Walk in Well Creek. What a blessing that has been to, you know, sort of expanding and growing the constituency for the creek. Something I'm still trying to figure out, getting the sequencing right. So often as advocates or artists or professionals, we think about the next, we think about the next step, but we don't always think about the next step after the next step. Or we don't think about like, well, if the next step goes wrong, what am I gonna do then? So just in wrap it up, you know, the where do we go part, there's a lot of directions we can go. But I think how we build is super important. You know, under the Clean Water Act, we talk about avoid, minimize, mitigate effects of the natural environment. We don't talk about proactively trying to restore the environment. I think there's a lot we can do with mobility. I finally got to that, Willis, you know, New York City's initiative with Atlantic Basin and Pier 6. There's way more we can do. I think when we think about the water, we have a superficial view of what's on top, we have a rudimentary understanding of what's on the bottom, we have some idea of the shoreline because we see the tide go up and down, but we forget that whole zone of sort of water column, and whether it's for seaweed, whether it's for eelgrass, whether it's for more shellfish farming, mussels and oysters. And I really think, you know, in the big picture, we've got to commit ourselves as human beings to swimming. I don't think we'd have so many people drowning needlessly at beaches. I think we would all be better prepared for the next storm if we brought back the swim programs in New York City public parks and New York City public schools. And just the last one, just want to keep another kind of hat tip to the Alliance. You know, heat is a huge, 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 huge thing. And it's a public health crisis. And we don't really treat it like that. But we really need to find new ways to do it. And that's one of my worries about turnover in city leadership, et cetera, is how we build and the heat, our urban heat island that we've made for ourselves is such a long, took us so long to get here, it's going to take us a long way to unwind it, but we need some continuity in leadership. And with that, I will say thank you and invite Sarah and Willis up for the last Q&A. Thank you.
And we have about 10 minutes for the Q&A portion.
Questions? We'll pass the mic around. Yeah.
I have one. I wanted to ask a little bit more if you can expand or what has been the history in terms of the restoration projects like cleanups or like restoration not only like the shores of the ecology in terms of fauna and flora. If there have been portions that have taken more attention, or like if you can share at least name to look at for more information on the history of the efforts of restoration so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say real quick on Newtown Creek, restoration has been slow. We've done all these sort of pilot projects, whether they're floating marshes or the suspended basins. The city did install a pilot marsh in the Dutch Kills tributary, which did very well for a number of years, but didn't have sustained maintenance. And that's a big issue that, right, you can't just plant something and not take care of it. There has to be maintenance year after year. So the creek has been very slow. We're very hopeful with the Superfund cleanup that that's going to work in tandem with large-scale restoration. But it's kind of hard to do that before you do a large-scale cleanup. We're happy to talk more about that, but maybe Carter can talk about stuff around the harbor as well.
I'll just give a shout out to the Harbor Estuary Program, New York, New Jersey Harbor Estuary Program. Go to harborestuary.org. They've got their big State of the Harbor conference in about a month. So that's probably a good time to sort of get the pulse on everything. Does Rosanna still work there? Does anybody know? She would also be a good person to talk to. Rosanna Nobles, N-O-B-L-E-S, or is it Rosanna De Silva? Anyway, go ahead, Sarah, in case we got something there. Yeah.
I just knew Rosanna, but I did want to say that everyone can be a scientist, and I think what happened with the city's fringe marsh in Dutch Kills, which is a tributary from Newtown Creek, in the community, like the boaters on the creek, and all of you who would love to see the tidal marshes return, if the city had engaged the local community just to maintain the fencing so that the Canada geese wouldn't graze the place, but that's all that happened. Can't begrudge them for that. But if we simply, the more collaborative work we do with our own municipal agency, then they will be more guided by what we want to see happen. And there is already something like that happen. The Newtown Creek Alliance and the community is engaged with the bioswales, which are these street pits which trap the water so it doesn't go into the waterway. And there's a street pit near the Newtown Creek Nature Walk. I guess it's on Provost. And there's a little sign that says, "This pit is being looked after," and then the man's name, who lives a few blocks away. That's exactly the spirit we need.
Other questions? Mike's out there, yeah.
This is maybe basic, but do you think it's generally safe for people to live very close to, like, is there an issue of contamination out of the water?
Yeah, to the degree of, most of the concern, in terms of like the Superfund process with the creek is about exposure to the sediments or exposure to like wildlife that's in the sediments. In terms of living near the creek, most of the hazards are gonna be unrelated to the sediment at the bottom of the creek. There's upland contamination that's severe, so there's also a federal Superfund site known as the Meeker Avenue Plume in Greenpoint, and the library's been very involved in that and trying to get more awareness about. But there's basically a giant, we have the Greenpoint oil spill, which is the largest underground oil spill in the country, and then we have the Meeker Avenue Plume, which is basically dry cleaning and metal solvents, and those can go through people's buildings. And so, yeah, so if you live in that zone, you should try to get tested in your building. But that's a much more present health risk than living near the waterway. And most of the residential areas that are, near the creek now are near the mouth, where it's much, much cleaner anyways. But even, it's really, it's more of exposure to stuff that's in the land or air pollution from, proximity to highways and things like that. We've done some air quality research with NYU in the past few years, and some of the stuff is also very difficult to study. Doing things like water quality testing can be easy for biological factors, but understanding like chemicals takes a lot of time and money. But I would definitely, if you in Greenpoint, check out Meeker Avenue Plume. New York State has a whole registry of all their polluted sites on land, but those are definitely presenting much more of a direct hazard for residents.
Other questions? Any experts want to chime in? I mean, by golly, you're all doing such interesting work, so I think there's an invisible soapbox. It's sitting right in front of your chair. Just stand on it and say, oh, perfect.
Is there any history of the creek and the contamination of it? You'd recommend academic or otherwise?
Yes, Peter, who spoke 2 weeks ago, and Peter's published a book that is available online.
It's in this library too.
It's in the library too. What's the title of the book, Peter?
Newtown Creek and then something about industrial history. Newtown Creek is...
I don't feel bad for not remembering it. So that's a great resource. And then we have a lot of resources on our website, story maps and things like that, where you can dive into more of the research about some of the history of the creek. There's also, if you really get into it, the whole Superfund process, right? Carter mentioned these 1,000-page documents, and some of those are really interesting too, because there's technical stuff, but then there's also a lot of historical information in those as well.
Other questions? Comments, suggestions?
For Sarah, Sarah, how did you get associated with the creek, or what made you start the project when you did?
Very good question. When I came to LaGuardia, which is the CUNY campus on the other side of the creek over in Long Island City, I didn't even know there was water behind the college. I had no idea. And then someone in social sciences who had studied the industries out on Long Island, the shellfishing industries, and was aware of what happened 200 years ago on Newtown Creek, he said, well, yeah, if you want to see an environmental science program, which is what I wanted to see, develop at the college, why don't you do something with the creek? And my first reaction was, what creek? And so this is how it happened. Although I fell in love with biology because my dad would take me out to the intertidal zone, I actually ended up studying neuroscience, and it was that effort to create an environmental science program at LaGuardia that engaged me with the community. I became aware of what the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, was doing, became aware of an entire community that we could engage with. And so the program ended up partnering heavily with the Newtown Creek Alliance, one of those community groups that we met because we wanted a community college environmental program to engage with the community so that we could together steward our estuary ecosystem, this incredible place we're living in, and which was probably tidal salt marsh where we are sitting right now, spreading hundreds of acres on either side of Newtown Creek. So, and then just the excitement of just beginning to bring back a little of that habitat caught fire with students and faculty, and an environmental science program did develop.
Hey, this I guess question specifically for Carter. I'm down by the water all the time, and I'm just like working in this small corner. As someone who like sees a lot of global like restoration projects, how is like New York doing? Like relative to the world in terms of like, I guess particularly like waterfront access, and then like ecological restoration, like on the global report card, like where do we fall?
That would be a real challenge to answer. Well, I should point you to a global report card done by a Dutch company called Arcadis that does a lot of work for New York City on flood control, wastewater treatment, sediment management, etc. You know, New York is just different than U.S. cities, and it's different than global cities. I think it's like I think our issue is as a society, you know, that runs on election cycles, resets a button every election cycle, we can really only focus on like 1-2 issues at a time. So that is my way of skirting your answer, because I think the issues that we're all talking about tonight are somewhere between issue number 5 and issue number 10, when, you know, we're still focused on affordable housing, public safety, and I really don't think even like public health cracks the top 5, you know? So I'd say we're doing way better than we were in the 90s, but I think the key difference is the type of leadership we get, sort of running agencies and sort of inspiring and allocating budgets. We're either getting leadership that is very socially oriented, like focused on people and human metrics, crime statistics, you know, whatever, or occasionally we get the infrastructure people, you know, let's fix the mercury problem in schools, let's get lead out of our water supply. And I think the culture that we have today, we really get kind of social people and not great infrastructure leadership. So that's my long way of saying, I don't think we're doing great. We could be doing a lot worse, but the challenge is with every election cycle, like how do we get one of these issues, how do we get it to crack the top 5?
Could I add something that you had said? Just by taking an initiative and doing a guerrilla operation, like hanging those basins on the bulkhead, people don't know what is possible. They're not thinking about it. Our entire system is designed so people don't think about it. There are other issues, big capital organizing many of people's thought processes, so that when something happens, and people see it and say, maybe that could be spread around. Maybe we could do that in a bigger way. So that was such an important point. I learned that from you. Slogging, no. But we slogged for a year trying to get permits. And the system wasn't designed for environmental remediation, environmental stewardship. It was all about commerce and commercial questions, and that's what the regulations were designed for. So we just had to go ahead and do it. And then a system kind of gets put together from the ground up so that it can support in the long term going from a pilot to a large-scale project that actually has some environmental impact in the end.
And if you look at the fine print of the regulation, say surface water or water coverage, if it's less than 200 square feet of water coverage, you don't need a permit. If you start to replicate and then you aggregate all these things to where you're over 200 square feet, you know, maybe they'll figure it out, but if you at some point, but if you just find partners and places to replicate the good stuff you're doing already, a lot of that can just happen below the radar screen. You know, it's just communicating these successes, I think.
Carter, I'm sorry, I think we've run out of time for tonight's program, but I would like to, on the behalf of Greenpoint Library, like to thank Newtown Creek Alliance for putting together this wonderful series with Carolina and Peter and Carter, and it's nice to finally meet Sarah, and thank you all for coming tonight, and please keep up with what we're doing here at the library. We're really concerned about our environmental issues, but also about ways to connect people to the water and nature and how to take care of everything that we love. So thank you so much to you all. Thank you.
Yeah, and don't forget Carter's Cabinet of Curiosities. And we have some brochures for that too. So.
And also, I apologize, we are closing very soon, so we have some good conversations to have, but I'd encourage you to head down to our beautiful plaza outside to continue any of those conversations so that we can prep the room for story time tomorrow. So thank you so much.
You know, I've never been there. Someone put this at the laundromat. They slipped this in my laundry, and I was like, I could take it back. But what a gift.